You're listening to G-Woman Radio, the 24/7 radio for the gifted, genius, and game-changing woman.
Welcome to the G-Spot, powered by G-Woman Radio. The G-Spot is a bold space for genius conversations with global game changers. Each episode of this live radio show brings together thought leaders, innovators, business owners, creators, and change makers for fearless conversations about leadership, legacy, innovation, and global impact. Now welcome your hosts, Alex Okoroji, Frankie Picasso, Swapna Abraham, Clara Rufai, and Mayuri Naidu.
Hey everyone, welcome to the G-Spot. My name is Alex Okoroji and I'm coming to you live today on Good Friday here on G-Woman Radio. And yes, I'm all the way here in Maryland in the United States. So, you know what? I'm going to just check in on my co-hosts and see how everyone is doing. Hey Frankie, how are you?
I'm terrific, Alex. Thank you for asking. I'm here in the G-Woman Studios in Toronto, and it is certainly a Good Friday. We finally have sunshine and warm weather.
Hey, Swapna.
Hi, Alex. Hi, everyone. This is Swapna from Cochin, Kerala, India, God's own country, by the way. Good Friday is the best Friday. Having a chill time here on the G-Spot show.
Woohoo. And Mayuri?
Hello, everyone. I am all the way in South Africa in sunny Johannesburg, a wonderful 23 degrees Celsius at 6 p.m. So we are having the best Good Friday.
Woohoo! Not 31 degrees today, right?
No, not 31.
Last Friday was so hot. Well, you know, I'm always excited that we get together every Friday to do the show. And of course, we're missing one of us, right? Clara, who can't join us today on the show, but she's going to be jealous because, you know, today's kind of like a pretty good Friday, right? But, you know, I'm still on a high from just something that we all just pulled together. I mean, we just celebrated our first anniversary. And we pulled, you know, the whole 144 voices. This was a 12-hour live global broadcast marathon. We had women from around the world join us on G-Woman TV to share their voices and share what's in their heart. They had powerful messages. And I don't know, how do you feel about it? You know, ladies, how are you feeling about what we just achieved?
I am so proud of it. And I'm still getting responses from women calling me today saying how amazing it was. Like they never expected anything to be just so incredible, that their voice would be heard around the world, that they would be able to even get on a stage and give their messages out. So it was fabulous.
Yes, I know. And just that powerful greed of expression, right? You know, 12 hours of live broadcast, 12 segments, 12 hosts, 12 speakers per hour, and just we creating that collective awakening, really, you know, just letting women just talk uninterrupted. And this is not something that we've seen before where, you know, women's voices are diluted, minimized, rejected, suppressed, and just to have that opportunity for them to just speak what's in their heart uninterrupted for 12 hours. And, I'm still on the high. So we're excited. Don't forget, this is the G-Spot. And yes, this is where genius meets the global game changer. I'm Alex Okoroji, like I mentioned. And I'm joined by my powerhouse co-hosts, the co-founders of G-Woman Media. Now, the theme today is Voices Unfiltered, the global fight for expression and representation. Over to you, Frankie.
Thank you. And I just love that. I can't wait to talk to our guest today. But every week, we do bring you bold conversations with women shifting culture, challenging systems, and creating new legacies. Over to you, Swapna.
Thank you, Frankie. Well, today's episode is all about, like Alex mentioned, Voices Unfiltered, the global fight for expression and representation. And we are thrilled to welcome a game changer who is blazing trails in her field. I have the honor of filling in for my dear colleague, co-founder of Europe, UK, the lovely Shine strategist Clara Rufai, with our G list. So before we bring our game changer on, here's a shout out to our G list. Who do we have today? Ellen Johnson Sirleaf for her stellar work in politics and leadership. Africa's first elected female president and a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. The Iron Lady who steered Liberia from war to peace. Gosh, world leaders, listen on. And on leadership and change, this is what Ellen had to say. If your dreams don't scare you, they're not big enough. And on women and empowerment, here's what she had to say. Women must be drivers of change, not just beneficiaries. Gosh, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? Or haven't we heard enough? And the other on the G list today is the lovely Sunita Williams, our champion in space exploration. Over 300 days in orbit, a fearless figure floating in the unknown. She was here recently in Kerala, by the way, not too long ago, and we had the pleasure of listening to her firsthand. Here's what Sunita has to say about dreams and exploration. The sky is not the limit, for there are footprints on the moon. And here's what she had to say on gender equality. We, women, might be smaller in size compared to men, but we have the same brains. Gee, so that's what we have on our G list today. Clara, try to do the best, but I know you rock it totally. We miss you. Over to you, lovely Mayuri, for the rest.
Thank you, Swapna. If you haven't read our latest Top 50 G-Woman Power List in the Gutsy Issue 2025 edition of G-Woman magazine, I know you want to, so after the show, head on to www.gwomanmag.com to read all about the amazing, gifted, genius, and game-changing women that are featured. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Mayuri. And that was a beautiful list, Swapna. And always excited to see who makes it to the G list, right, every week. And of course, these are really powerful, gifted, genius, game-changing women. So before we bring on our guests, we'll take a quick commercial break and then we'll be back. Don't go anywhere.
Every era has its turning point, a moment when silence becomes too small for the voices ready to rise. Across continents, across cultures, women are creating, leading, building, and redefining what power looks like. But brilliance needs a platform, courage needs an amplifier, and genius deserves a global stage. Welcome to G-Woman Media, a place where women's stories are not an afterthought, they are the centerpiece. Where diversity isn't decoration, it's our DNA. Where leadership isn't asked for, it is claimed. At G-Woman Media, expression is power. We amplify women's voices, stories, experiences, and ideas to shape culture and inspire change. At G-Woman Media, excellence is our standard. We build high-caliber media platforms, content, and communities that honor the brilliance of women. At G-Woman Media, representation is a right. We create spaces where diverse global women are visible, valued, and celebrated. At G-Woman Media, leadership is feminine. We promote women's leadership, agency, and influence across industries and continents. At G-Woman Media, legacy is built, not given. We empower women to own their platforms, shape their futures, and leave impact-driven legacies. We are the magazine that documents her rise, the radio that carries her voice, the TV that tells her story, and the community that holds her journey. For the global woman, gifted, genius, game changer. This is your space, G-Woman. Your mirror, your megaphone, your movement. The world is listening. Now it's your turn to speak.
Yes, now it's your turn to speak, and we're back. So wherever you're joining us, don't forget that you're listening to the G Spot live on G Women Radio. And yes, we're excited to speak to our very special game changer today, who's already in the studio. So let's get into it. Now, our guest is Liesl Gerntholtz. She is the managing director of the PEN Barbey Freedom to Rights Center at PEN America. She is a South African human rights lawyer who spent the early part of her career working for the South African Human Rights Commission and the Commission on Gender Equality in Post-Apartheid South Africa. Now, she was the head of the HIV litigation unit of the AIDS Law Project and the director of Swapna Legal Advocacy Center. Now, in those capacities, she led high-impact strategic litigation to advance the human rights of people living with HIV and women affected by violence. Now, she has lived in the U.S. since 2008, but remains committed to her South African roots, serving on the boards of several South African human rights organizations. Now, between 2008 and 2020, Liesl worked for Human Rights Watch in different capacities. Now, she was the executive director of the Women's Rights Division for nearly 10 years, overseeing research and advocacy that responded to the most critical women's rights issues in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, and the U.S. Welcome to the G-Spot, Liesl. We're so happy to have you join us here on the show.
Thank you so much. And yes, I was muted despite the fact that you told me not to mute. But I am really delighted to be here, and congratulations on your anniversary. What an amazing achievement.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Alex. Liesl, you've been on the front lines of some of the most defining human rights battles of our time. But every path like that has to start somewhere. So what was the spark that started your journey?
So I think for me, my origin story, which is both a little bit frivolous but also really true, was that I became committed to human rights because of John Travolta. And that really dates me because I'm sure that many of your listeners probably don't even know who he is. But when I was probably around 12 or 13, I was born, grew up in South Africa, and I went to a Catholic convent. So, given that it is Good Friday today. And in about 1972, the Pope declared that apartheid was a sin, and Archbishop Dennis Hurley, who was then the senior Catholic cleric in South Africa, then said that all Catholic institutions, and that stage there were schools and hospitals, and the convent, the school that I went to, had an obligation then to really ensure that all the operations in South Africa that they ran were integrated. And so I went to school, in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and I went to a fully integrated school, which was incredibly rare in those days. It was a tiny Catholic convent in Pretoria. Pretoria was the apartheid capital of South Africa. And in 1976, Greece came out with Olivia Newton-John and John Travolta, and it was this movie we all wanted to see. We were so excited. And I remember my mom telling me that I couldn't go to the cinema with my friends because the cinemas were not integrated. Apartheid meant that every single thing you did was regulated by your race. Mm-hmm. And as a 12-year-old kid, it just struck me as so profoundly unfair. There was something about that idea that my friends couldn't see the same movies I saw in the same building. That really, for some reason, struck a note with me. That sense of unfairness and injustice, I think, really did stick with me. And, after that, I studied law in South Africa. I worked for a number of post-apartheid institutions. But it really was, truly, Greece and John Travolta that got me on this path.
What a terrific story. We come from the same era, by the way.
It was an amazing time to be alive, I will say. Mm-hmm. It is a thing that continues. Being part of that transition in South Africa is the thing that even in these days where the world seems very broken, it is something that still gives me hope.
I love that. Over to you, Swapna.
Thank you, Frankie. Well, Liesl, that you mentioned Catholic and boarding school. I was there myself at the age of 4 in a boarding school. And I kind of have a deja vu when you spoke about that. And just wondering, because here we're all about women and all of that, but then from what you spoke, it's all about also race and human rights, right? Would love to know, Liesl. I'm sure there was one or more, but is there a personalized barrier that? No, there was for sure. I think there will have been. How did you overcome one of those huge personalized barriers earlier on in your life?
I think, as one of the last generations of white South Africans that benefited very directly from apartheid, I think I've always been very aware of my privilege. And, when you come from the global South and you work in the US or you work in Western Europe, you have another kind of privilege as well, because I think there is sort of something that often you're fetishized because you're sort of from the global South or from a country that, many people consider to be quite exotic or so on. So I think that in terms of the barriers that I experience, I suppose what I do think about a lot is I think about the fact that as a woman, I was paid less than my male colleagues, even at a human rights organization.
Wow.
I think about the fact that I and many of my female colleagues bore those burdens of caregiving as well as responsibility in the workplace, which I think is something we still are struggling with as a society, to acknowledge the importance of caregiving and provide the kind of systems. One of the things that I was really pleased to see, New York recently had a mayoral election, and one of the sort of key parts of the platform of the person who won was free childcare. Because I think that is an incredibly important issue, and we're still nowhere near to be able to support working women. So I think those kind of struggles around economic justice and the gendered nature of that were ones where I experienced sort of a sense of discrimination, a sense that even somebody like me with my education, my skin color, and somebody who worked in a nonprofit sector still experienced those kinds of discrimination.
Right, Liesl. Still sounds big board when you've explained about your personalized barrier. I was hoping it'd be something from like Liesl's life, you know what I mean? That said, I'm going to ask the next question for my dear colleague Clara. Liesl, what's one myth about what you do that you'd like to bust?
One of the things that I think is really important to understand, I think people think that if you work in a nonprofit, if you're working in a mission-driven organization, or you're working for human rights, that the sort of same challenges that women face in other workplaces don't exist. And I think that's simply not true. I think that women in nonprofits face the same barriers. They face the same issues around things like sexual harassment in the workplace, sexual violence in the workplace. I think there is the sense that these spaces are more inclusive for women, that women are able to compete on the same playing fields as their male counterparts. And that's actually not my experience. So I think that's an important thing that we, people who work in the nonprofit really need to think about, that we still have a responsibility to build workplaces where women, and especially young women, can thrive.
It's the first time we're hearing something that sort on the show on our G-Spot. Thank you, Liesl, for that. And over to you, Mayuri.
Hello, Liesl. Welcome. Hoe gaan het?
Baie goed, dankie.
That's wonderful. Okay, that's all the Afrikaans I'm going to say, so I don't embarrass myself. I wanted to please, firstly, it's such an honor to speak to you. I'm so excited to have someone that has South African roots. I already feel connected to you in some weird and wonderful way, even though we don't know each other. Just hearing your accent made me feel so at home. So that was wonderful.
Same, completely the same.
I just wanted to know, what advice would you have for the next generation of women leaders who are battling and facing these issues that you've spoken about?
That's a good question. I'm not somebody who thinks of myself as having a lot of advice, because I think what I have learned is that very often, especially younger women, have really figured out some of the stuff that women of my generation still grapple with. What I notice about young women in the workplace I'm in, but more generally, is that they have a better sense of boundary. They have a much clearer sense of what kind of conduct is acceptable or not. So I really admire young women because I do think that they have really taken the platform that sort of feminism and older women have created, and they've really, really sort of leveraged it. They've really been clear about how important gender equality is, speaking truth to power. But if I was to give one piece of advice, I think it would be find your community. The things that have really supported me and kept me going through difficult times have been finding that community of like-minded women, on rare occasions, not often enough, like-minded men, but finding that community of people that share your values, that are working for the same things, and that who can really lift you up when things are when things are hard. That community, I think, and community generally right now, I think is very, very important. I was just in Minnesota. We took a delegation of writers to be in solidarity with this community that has really been occupied by a very brutal immigration agents. Mayuri, some of the images that I saw there were very, very, they reminded me a lot about what South Africa looked like in the 80s, a very brutal law enforcement agency really attacking peaceful protesters. But what is happening there also is the emergence of these amazing communities that are deeply responsive to the needs, hyper-local. So things like taking food to people who are afraid to leave their houses, taking kids to school, but also protesting at a macro level against these injustices. So I really do think at these moments community matters, and it particularly matters when you're doing this kind of work and you're a woman.
Absolutely, Liesl. That really resonates with me about community, because that's what G Women is about as well, right? Building a community so we can collaborate and support each other. Thank you so much for that. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Mayuri. And, it's been interesting just listening to Liesl share about her journey and some of the things that she's observed, experienced, and continues to experience, right? Working in our nonprofit organizations and sectors and all of that. Here on the show, we always like to ask, what's your G-spot moment? And I know that you talked about how Grease and John Travolta really inspired just your interest in the work that you do, right? But I want to know what that moment in time, that game-changing moment, because you became a human rights lawyer, right? And so what was that game-changing moment that showed you that you were built for this, that this was the moment, that something that triggered you and said, you know what, I know this is where I wanted to go, but I know now that I'm built for this?
I think growing up in South Africa has been absolutely formative for me. So, much of what has really inspired me and much of what has, made me committed to doing this work comes from that experience. And I think a moment for me when I really understood that this was the right job for me when I was working at Swapna, which was a multidisciplinary center that was dealing with gender-based violence. And as probably everybody on this show knows, South Africa has always struggled with extremely high levels of violence against women. And the center was really trying to find sort of innovative and creative ways to use the law to help women. And we worked with a community up outside of the Kruger Park, actually, because, one of the things I really liked about that work is I got to go up there quite a lot. And we were trying to build a sort of a network of community paralegals. So essentially trying to empower women within those communities to help other women and give them some very basic legal tools. And I remember sort of at the end of one of the trainings of talking to women and hearing this cohort of women who'd sort of been through the training and who had started to support women, had thought about the kinds of partnerships that they were going to need to create with local police stations and social workers, and understanding that by giving them these very basic tools, they'd been able to go far beyond what we had expected. What we had expected is that they would really maybe accompany women when women were going to police station and to the magistrate's court to get protection orders against abusive partners. They would perhaps go with those women so those women wouldn't feel that they were so alone. But in fact, they went well beyond that. They built partnerships with the police station. They persuaded a local police station to set aside a room so that when women came to report sexual violence or they came to get information about protection orders, there was somewhere private for them to wait. There was somewhere private for them to tell their stories. They created this network of social workers who really helped women get connected to other resources. And I think it was both seeing the fact that this thing that I had done, I'm a lawyer, that is ultimately sort of a part of my identity, but seeing that you could give these tools to women who did not have necessarily legal degrees, who absolutely did not have legal degrees, and they could use them, but also seeing this amazing community of women who just stepped up, that you gave them a tiny bit of space and they just marched in there and they made this huge difference to their community. And I actually went back a couple of years ago. I mean, this is really 25 years ago. That project is still going. But I think it was that work that really made me understand that, this is what I want to do. And it is really, if you can get it right, it can really make a difference.
Wow, incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that, Liesl. That is so powerful. Just, just so powerful to see how you've got into where you are and the amazing work that you're doing. So we're going to take a quick commercial break and then we'll come back. Don't go anywhere.
Are you a gifted, genius, and game-changing woman looking for your tribe? This is your moment. Introducing the G-Woman Collective, a powerful new global hub where women who lead, build, create, and innovate come together to rise. Founded on the premise that women's collective voices hold boundless power. At the heart of our mission lies a powerful purpose: to ignite global visibility and momentum for women everywhere. Whether in boardrooms or broadcasting, the mission is simple: make women seen, heard, and unstoppable. Join thousands of women across continents in a vibrant digital epicenter that's redefining community, collaboration, and visibility. From private forums and global networking to live sessions, masterminds, mentorships, and exclusive media features, including access to our sub-collectives. This is not your average membership. This is your seat at the table. Become a G-Woman ally, G-Woman champion, or G-Woman vanguard, and step into a space designed to amplify your voice, fuel your mission, and elevate your legacy. Sign up now at gwomancollective.com and let's rise together. G-Woman Collective, where gifted, genius, and game-changing women belong.
Yes, welcome back. This is still the G Spot, and you're listening to us coming to you live on G Women Radio, www.gwomenradio.com. And of course, we've been talking to our very special genius game changer who's here with us in the studio, Liesl Gerntholtz. And she's been talking about her journey and the work that she does as a human rights lawyer. And of course, now as managing director at the Pan America, right? So we're just going to head on to our G Roundtable conversation. Over to you, Frankie.
Thank you, Alex. Liesl, when you were talking about Kruger National Park, it brought up a memory for me. I interviewed one of the Black Mambas, who are the anti-poaching squad, or women who just go through that park and make sure that nobody is killing rhinoceroses and things like that. And I thought, wow, they're so powerful, and it's amazing that they're doing that work. Our roundtable today, I wanted to talk about the power of voice. At G-Woman Media, we talk a lot about the power of voice, especially women's voices, because when women are heard, everything shifts. So let me ask you, who is more dangerous, a woman with no voice or a woman who's finally been heard?
Well, I know who autocrats and danger and the strong men of the world are more afraid of. I think they are afraid with women with voices, and that's why we see, in a moment where we're seeing rising autocracy, we're seeing rollback of democratic rights, we are seeing real pressure on human rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, the voice is dangerous because it disrupts their control over us. And so they're working really hard to put us back down. But silence is also dangerous, I think, because when you finally explode, you explode. And I mean, in your work as a lawyer, have you represented or seen women who just finally couldn't take it anymore?
I do think that firstly, silence can be powerful. I have noticed as I have got older in the workplace, I have noticed that I am less willing necessarily to talk to make other people, and by other people I mean largely men, feel comfortable. So I do think sometimes silence can be powerful and it can be an important tool. But I think the silence that you're talking about is often where women are deprived of their voices. And one of the things that we're definitely seeing is a very particular focus on depriving women of their voices and their rights in countries where you're seeing rising autocracy, pressure on human rights, rollback of democratic values. And I think if I think about places where women really have been silenced, something that comes to mind for me was work that I did in Somalia with Human Rights Watch, where we were documenting sexual violence during that conflict. And, you know, that was a society that not only was deeply, deeply riven by a long, long war, but also very, very restrictive gender norms. So, you know, what women could say, what women's place in public was seen, you know, what was okay for women to do in public and not. But again, I think as we interviewed women about their experiences, you would see this kind of, as they told their story and as they understood, because one of the things that we would do would be to explain to women how this conduct is really a human rights violation, that this is not okay, that this is really not acceptable, and in fact is illegal under human rights law. That sort of sense of being heard, I think, was extremely empowering for women, because often women in these places, not only do they not have a voice, but they have no way, you know, they are not heard in any meaningful way.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at the U.S., I mean, there's something going around right now where, I can't remember what they call it, but where they want the men to vote for the household. That's one way to take away a woman's voice.
Yes.
And we look at Afghanistan, who passed a law that women can't talk. And now they may not even be able to talk in their own homes if a man tells them
they
may
can't. Not sing, they may not talk, yeah.
Yeah. And so we see it in different ways, shapes, and forms, you know, how to silence us. And even you know, the shadow banning on LinkedIn, when women, you know, a few months ago were choosing to use a man's name when they wrote, because what they wrote was being, you know, suppressed if it had a woman's name and they talked about, you know, feminine conversations or DEI. So there's lots of ways to suppress women. I mean, they're very good at it. They've done it for a long time. But silencing is half the planet is going to be very difficult, I think.
Yeah. And it doesn't work. You know, you talk about Afghanistan, and some of the work that my team at Human Rights Watch did there was looking at access to education for girls. Mm-hmm. And this was obviously before the US withdrew troops and really allowed the Taliban to come fully back. But, you know, one of the things that was really striking to me was that during some of the most repressive periods under the Taliban, women still found a way to educate their girls. And there was this whole network of underground schools. There was this network of schools that were happening in places that men didn't often go. So in kitchens, in women's
in beauty parlors,
all of that. Mm-hmm. And, you know, in some respects, these schools were even better than the schools that were being funded by donors, because they were incredibly rigorous. People understood how dangerous it was, and they were going to make it count. So the one thing I think I've learned, and I've learned to play the long game, when you work on women's rights, you really do have to be willing to be in it for the long haul, is that as repressive as laws can be, as willing as governments and private individuals might be to silence women, to take away their rights, that ultimately it doesn't work. Because even in Afghanistan, these schools thrived for decades under the Taliban. And I have no doubt that at this moment there are women who are organizing, there are women teachers who are finding ways to pull together groups of little girls and who are teaching them to read and so on. You know, you cannot indefinitely repress half the population.
Have you ever worked with War Child in Somalia?
I have worked with War Child, yes. They've been a good partner of ours, especially on work we've done on child marriage in conflict situations.
Yeah, I think they're incredibly effective. And I my sister's here, chime in whenever you want to. But I wanted to, is there something that you think that we can do, women of the world can do for the women of Afghanistan? Because this is really something that bothers me.
I think it's incredibly hard to figure out sort of what we can do right now. I mean, there is a process that is, I think, going to be really important if member states at the UN come behind this. But there is an ongoing process to make gender apartheid a crime against humanity. So, in many respects, building on the idea that apartheid was a system that discriminated on the basis of race, looking at how in Afghanistan, and not only in Afghanistan, but Afghanistan is a particularly brutal and stark example of this, about how gender and sex are a marker for discrimination. So if that happens, and I say this with some trepidation, because we know that the international legal system, the human rights system, is really under attack. So, but assuming that there is still an international human rights system in place, declaring firstly that gender apartheid is a crime and ultimately a crime against humanity, which is one of the most serious international crimes, I think that will help. That doesn't answer your question, though, what we can do as individuals. For me, what I think a lot about solidarity in these moments, and not sort of performative solidarity, but really about what solidarity can mean for women who are oppressed. And in some respects, what that means, where there are places, so there are, in the US, in various countries, there have been women from Afghanistan who've been able to get out. Those women need our support. Those women are traumatized. Those women have had to leave everything. They've had to come to a strange country. So, a lot of the work that women's groups are doing with refugee women, including women from Afghanistan, I think is really important as solidarity. But I have to say that Afghanistan is a place that I find it really hard to answer that question in any kind of meaningful way about what can we do to help, because it's not really apparent to me what, if anything, we can do other than putting pressure on our own governments to hold the Taliban accountable. And we know that many governments that we have relied on in the past have stepped away from supporting women's rights, from funding women's rights, from protecting human rights. So it feels pretty dire right now.
Wow. Is there something that we can do to make sure that it becomes a human rights against humanity?
I think sort of supporting organizations. So there are a number of women's organizations, and what is, I think, really important about this process to me is that it is being led by women from Afghanistan, from women from Somalia, so from women from countries that are directly impacted by this. And I think there is a very good chance that over the next 2 years that gender apartheid will be included in a treaty that will designate it as a crime against humanity. That theoretically means that governments who are party to those conventions have an obligation to act. But as I said earlier, I think what we have seen over the past 2 years in Gaza, in Iran, we have really seen a weakening of a global commitment to sort of the norms and standards that were put in place after the First World War that are really supposed to protect civilians during conflict. And particularly, there's a set of obligations within those laws that protect women during conflict. And we've seen a real weakening against that. So I think one of the things we have to do more of is hold our own governments accountable to upholding those standards. And I think we're seeing, something for me that is interesting as a human rights lawyer and somebody who feels incredibly worried about the international human rights system. we've seen some politicians in various places, including, as I said, the new mayor of New York, some of the politicians in the UK and the Green Party who are actually explicitly referring to international human rights, and they're drawing on those frameworks to make the case about sort of what really their government should be doing, both internally and what we really should get better at doing is holding our governments accountable to those standards.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. This has been a really interesting conversation. We'll take a quick commercial break and then we'll come back for our G Spotlight segment.
Are you looking for a unique gift for baby showers, bedtime songs, fun time songs, and songs that teach lessons? Family road trip songs the whole family will enjoy. Songs that will trigger young imaginations, nurture and educate your children, but adults will enjoy too? Then choose a Children's Song a Day book. This extraordinary book experience contains 1,000 songs in 5 volumes that will delight children age 4 through 12, along with eye-popping illustrations and lyrics. Each song can be downloaded via a QR code on each page in 2 versions, one with full song, the other for a karaoke experience. Lyrics, melody, and singing are the creation and talent by Dr. Swapna Abraham, who embarked on a 1,000-day journey setting 4 world records in singing songwriting by the Golden Book of World Records. Each song is crafted for children to inspire dreams and explore life's wonders. They're available now on any Amazon near you, so get yours now and start singing.
It makes me want to frown. Down the hills, down the ocean, down the field.
Okay, we're back, and this is still the G Spot, and you're listening to us live on G Women Radio. And don't forget that you can join the conversation wherever you're listening from around the world. Yes, you can be part of this. Just make sure to leave your comments in the chat room, and of course, we'll make sure to bring it, to share it live here on the show. So it's time for our G Spotlight segment. Over to you, Swapna.
Thank you, Alex. Liesl, I can't tell you just how refreshing it is to listen to you with such a real-world perspective. In your last 18 years in the US, or what was before that, South Africa, and which it still does continue in South Africa, we'd like to know, what would you say is your legacy in all the human rights work that you've done, especially with women?
I mean, what I hope my legacy is that I have been a good mentor to younger women, because I point in my career where some of the young women I worked with earlier on are themselves now leading organizations, are sort
Wonderful.
And what I hope is that I have created space. When I worked at the Commission of Gender Equality in South Africa, we had a partnership with the Australian Human Rights Commission, and they had this saying that it was about, women who get into positions of power don't always facilitate a space that allows other women to enter those spaces. They roll up the ladder. And I hope that I have been somebody who's tried to throw down more ladders. And I would like that to be my legacy. I would like younger women who worked with me to think that I was a good feminist leader, that I helped them get their foot on the ladder. I hope that's my legacy.
Liesl, I can't say enough how important it is that women support women. In fact, I was just saying to someone today that I'm seeing more these days that women are women's worst enemies, and sadly so. So to hear you say that this should be your legacy, that you support and encourage other women, it's beyond amazing. Thank you very much, and we appreciate you.
And Swapna, can I say one other thing? That often there is a sense that that younger women may have benefited from working with me, but for me, it has been one of the most joyful things of my life is to have been able to work with younger women, because, as I said earlier, I do think that the next generation are so much better than we were at claiming their rights at not putting up with nonsense. And I have learned a lot. I have learned a lot from many of the younger women I've worked with. So it's been very much a two-way street, I think.
Nice. Thank you so much, Liesl. Well, let's hear from our audience. If you're live with us, drop your questions in the chat or request to come on air. And I'm going to give it over to my lovely host, Mayuri from South Africa. Over to you, Mayuri.
Thank you, Swapna. Actually, we do have a comment for Liesl. One of our listeners has said she's not only cerebral, she comes across as being effortlessly genuine, and her work is so authentic. So
That's very
you
kind.
are touching lives as we speak, Liesl. I have two questions for you. My first is that your work has consistently centered dignity, whether through fighting gender-based violence, HIV rights, or economic justice. But in spaces of power, dignity is often the first thing that is compromised. So what does it actually take to hold onto your humanity while working inside systems that can be so dehumanizing?
I think, again, it takes a community, because I felt that work that I have done in South Africa, in the UK, in the US, I've never been alone. It's never been just me. So, finding your community, finding your people, and fighting that struggle together is, it's the only way to do it, because none of us, they are very rare people. And I think, Mayuri, you know what I'm going to say here. They're very rare people who do on their own change the world. Nelson Mandela was probably one of them. But most of the change happens in partnership, in coalition, and you need that community. So I would say that for me, I've been sustained by my community. I've been sustained by the examples I've had in South Africa of the many, many men and women who fought against apartheid, but who centered their own dignity and the dignity of people. And I think I have also been lucky enough to work on human rights and women's rights at a moment, that feels gone now, but at a moment where they've felt that there was a lot of opportunity to make change. It felt like there were real spaces that we could transform systems of power. And that is also very sustaining when you feel that actually what you're doing is making change. It helps in those moments where you feel things are stuck and calcified.
Absolutely. And that actually leads me into you brought it beautifully for me into my second question, which is, having started your journey in South Africa and you've gone on to shape global human rights work, what parts of South Africa still live in how you lead, how you fight and define justice today?
I think for me, the idea of Ubuntu, which is, I think, fundamentally a human rights concept, which is the acknowledgement of every person's innate dignity and humanity. So for me, I think that was something that I really do try to take with me. I take South Africans' resilience and sense of humor, because I think one of the things that you can never ever get away from is that South Africans will find humor in any situation. And
absolutely.
And also I find I take a lot of comfort in being able to say, no matter what's happening, ach, shame,
Ach, shame.
Ach, shame, because people don't understand that. But they understand the sentiment. But I think it was a tremendously transformative experience as a young South African. The first time I voted was in the referendum when the National Party, the National had the referendum. The second time I voted was in the first democratic election. So I think witnessing and being in South Africa and feeling part of that transformation was absolutely transformative for me. And everything that I have been able to achieve has been because I've been South African and because I've lived through that period. I mean, you can take the girl out of South Africa, but you can never take South Africa out of the girl. I mean, it's hard to overstate. One of my most treasured moments recently is that, my children have sort of grown up outside of South Africa largely because of my work. They will tell you that they're South African, but one of my oldest daughter just recently finished reading a book on South Africa, and I think sort of understood for a moment how wonderful that transformation was. And I can't say enough about how transformative that was for me.
Absolutely. I mean, the humor, I always say that our resilience and our humor and ability to bounce back is quite a thing that I'm so proud to say I'm South African. I can hear you are too. Thank you so much for that, Liesl. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Mayuri and Liesl. It's been a blessing listening to you and seeing the impactful work you're doing. Truly, we're so blessed to have you here on the show. So we're going to take a quick musical break, and then we'll come back for our Drop Mic moment. Don't go anywhere, people.
What do you see when you look at me? What is the first thing that you think? What's on your mind when you talk to me? Is it my size, my class, my clothes? What do you think you know about the girl you met a moment ago? So much you don't know. You've gotta look deeper than what you see. We are all bound together, we're like one big family, like one big family. You've gotta look deeper than what you see. We are all bound together, we're like one big family, like one big family. Hold my hand if you understand what I'm trying to say to you. We are all the same. Hold my hand if you understand there's light inside of you. We are all the same. How you gonna face the changing world with eyes that never look beyond someone's age, their race, their weight, oh. And maybe it's time that you realize you can't see the forest for the trees when you've got a veil on your eyes. And that's why you've gotta look deeper than what you see. We are all bound together, we're like one big family, like one big family. You've gotta look deeper than what you see. We're all bound together, we're like one big family, like one big family. Hold my hand if you understand what I'm trying to say to you. We are all the same. Hold my hand if you understand there's a light inside of you. We are all the same. We're all a little different, sure. We all have our own way of living life, of sharing joy. We might celebrate on a different night from each other, but we all breathe the same air, and we all cry together, 'cause we are bound forever like one big family. Hold my hand if you understand what I'm trying to say to you. We are all the same. Hold my hand if you understand there's a light inside of you. We are all the same.
Okay, that's Family from Danielle Taylor, and we love her here on the show. Okay, so wherever you're listening from around the world, don't forget that this is still the G-Spot, and we're coming to you live on G-Woman Radio, and we've been talking to our very special genius game changer, Liesl, who's been doing an amazing work and just sharing her work, her journey with us. So it's time for our Drop Mic moment, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Frankie. What's your Drop Mic moment from everything that Liesl shared with us here?
Thank you, Alex. Liesl said, find your community. The things that supported me is finding a community of like-minded women who share your values and lift you up when things are hard.
Oh my God, that's what
important. Were you going to say that? I know. I told you to go first this week.
Okay, Swapna, over to you.
Bingo. community. But you know what? Thank you so much, Mayuri. I'm going to just say, ag shame. I empathize with you, but I go with the community thing. That's what hit me. But I'm going to say, ag shame. I learned something great. Well done.
What about you, Mayuri?
You know, I knew everyone was going to say community, so I have a different one. I actually took the fact that Liesl said women cannot be silenced, so we will always find a way, whether it's in a beauty salon or a kitchen, we will find a way to get our message across in times of trouble. That's what builds the community and the country. So thank you, Liesl, for that reminder.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Well, you know, everyone already said what I was going to say. So I'd probably just go with the spirit of Ubuntu, you know, that she talked about, and, you know, just carrying that spirit with her, the South African spirit of Ubuntu, because we're really one big family. We're the same, you know, I think the work that you do as a human rights, you know, advocate, lawyer, and all of that, basically is just really helping all of us see ourselves and each other, right? And to create that level ground for every one of us. So just before we wrap this up, we're going to ask you, Liesl, any final words for our listeners?
I firstly want to say thank you to all of you. This has been such a wonderful, enriching, funny, warm conversation. I have really, really enjoyed it. I have to say, I was like, well, what are you going to talk to me about for an hour? But it's flown by. It's really flown by. So just thank you for including me. I had such a great time, and it has, again, reminded me of the importance of community. You know, right here on this radio station, we have it. So thank you very much. And I hope you'll let me come back.
Oh, we would love to have you back. Definitely. Absolutely. Well, we want to say thank you to our listeners. Thank you for listening to our show. Don't forget to follow us online at GWomen Media and tag us in your thoughts with hashtag GSpotRadio. If you missed this live or any portion of this, don't forget you can catch the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast, or of course on our podcast network on GWomen Radio as well. You can catch the replay on www.gwwomenradio.com or wherever else, like I mentioned, you get your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spreaker, anywhere else. But until next time, stay genius, stay game
changing.
Stay game changing, ladies.
You're tuned into GWomen Radio for the global woman, gifted, genius, game changer.